Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the fallout from Prime Minister's questions yesterday, which I did do a video on, which is making it look extremely bad for Boris Johnson. In particular, potentially just the suggestion that his time as Prime Minister is going to be severely limited to much less than the remainder of this Parliament. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So one of the things I discussed in Prime Minister's questions yesterday, and the thing that's pretty much blown up, is Keir Starmer quoted government advice from, earlier on in the pandemic. And Boris Johnson made the massive mistake of saying that this was wrong. And he didn't need to either. Obviously, he can't answer any of Keir Starmer's questions without looking very bad, but he just does his usual blather and distraction. What he absolutely must not do is to say that what Keir Starmer has said is objectively wrong when he is quoting something. As a result of it, Boris Johnson probably thought, right, I deflected that all right. Okay, anyone watching it will realise I've been stitched up like a kipper yet again, but most people don't watch it. However, Keir Starmer has not let Johnson get away with this. And he wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, which I'm going to read out to you. It says, "Dear Prime Minister, in the House of Commons earlier today, I said, until 12th March, the government's own official advice was, and I'm quoting from it, it remains very unlikely that people receiving care in a care home will become infected. In your response, you said, no, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't true that the advice said that, and actually we brought the lockdown in care homes ahead of the general lockdown. The advice I was referring to was published on 25th of February 2020. It states, it is therefore very unlikely that anyone receiving care in a care home or the community will become infected. At this point of national crisis, it is more important than ever that the government ministers are accurate in the information they give. Given this, I expect you to come to the House of Commons at the earliest opportunity to correct the record and to recognise that this was official government guidance regarding care homes. I am copying this letter to the Speaker of the House of Commons." Now, here is the thing. Boris Johnson at this point has one of two options. He can turn up to the House and he can say, okay, yeah, you were not incorrect. He'd be humiliated. He'd look very, very silly, because what he'd basically be having to admit to is that he has inadvertently, potentially, misled the House. The alternative is that he doesn't do that, and then it's obvious to everyone that he has misled the House and that he will not turn up to the House and correct the record, because that's all that's been asked for here. There's not been asking for an apology or anything like that. Boris Johnson is allowed to turn up to the House and make out that it was inadvertent, that he was mistaken. He wishes just to correct the record. Fair enough. If he doesn't do that, then Starmer wins that way as well, because Boris Johnson then looks like he's someone who doesn't care about setting the record straight. And Boris Johnson did respond in a letter where he didn't tackle the issue at all. He just did his usual distraction about, but he couldn't actually say that Keir Starmer was still wrong, because Keir Starmer was not wrong. He was quoting from government guidance. And the thing is that Boris Johnson's letter to Starmer does nothing. It is just another example of waffle. But the problem is that the damage was done. It's, the response from Johnson is exactly the sort of thing he needs to do, but he's unable to do, because usually political opponents, like leaders of the opposition, usually describe the impact of what the government is doing, and they say how many people it's negatively affecting. But that is easy to deflect for a dishonest man like Johnson. It's absolutely easy, because all you do is you say, well, that's not how I see it, or, well, that's not the message I get from talking to members of the public. The sort of thing. This happens all the time in politics. But Starmer isn't describing the effects of government failure. He's quoting their own words back at them. He's not making statements of opinion, but incontrovertible fact. And Johnson simply has no answer for this, because you can't deflect that. He needs to try and turn these exchanges with Starmer into matters of opinion, because then people will, default to their political leanings. But that is not what's happening. And what is more, it's becoming increasingly obvious even to his own side. And another thing that might not occur to Johnson or his opponents is not simply that Keir Starmer is taking him apart with each question that he poses, but that there is a deliberate pattern to this, a strategy. And I don't just mean each week. I don't just mean that he follows up one question and then responds to it and follows up with another in each week, which he is doing. But I'm talking about potentially over a number of weeks, potentially even long term. Remember that Keir Starmer is a very experienced prosecutor. For those who are not aware, he was the top prosecutor in the country, the Director of Public Prosecutions. He is used to carefully laying traps for intelligent and learned opponents in court, other QCs. Who's to say that he isn't doing likewise for his rather less intelligent and completely unlearned opponent in Parliament? We may well discover that some of the questions being asked now are actually little time bombs waiting to go off in a few weeks or a few months. And Johnson, who is clearly putting no more preparation into his defence against Starmer at these PMQs than he is in preparing the country for the pandemic or for Brexit, is very likely to come a cropper. And it is one thing for those on the left to be cheering along every time Starmer toys with Johnson like a cat playing with a mouse. Of course we're going to be cheering along everything that Starmer says. But when those on the hard right are also talking about it in those terms, that's something else. So following Prime Minister's questions, one thing that surprised me, genuinely surprised me, was the Telegraph. Of all people, the Telegraph wrote an article that actually, if you'd have just shown someone this article without saying where it had come from, you might have thought it was written by The Guardian, which is a left-wing leaning newspaper. But no, the Telegraph. The Telegraph is right-wing. It's owned by the Barclay brothers. They are all about Conservative government. And this is the paper that has a very close relationship with Boris Johnson. It's the one that he wrote for. They paid him £275,000 a year just to write a weekly column whilst he was a backbencher. This is what the Telegraph had to say following that PMQs. Was it trying to big him up? Was it trying to say that actually Starmer fell flat or anything like that, as you would do if you were trying to prop up Boris Johnson? Let's look at what they said. They said, Keir Starmer took Boris Johnson apart. That was the headline. They also backed up the notion that Johnson was factually wrong to say that Starmer was wrong with the quote. So they're not backing that up either. Few little quotes from this Telegraph article. One of which was, Mr. Johnson could not. In fact, it wasn't obvious he'd understood the question. His reply was a cascade of helpless waffle. Does that sound like a pro-conservative newspaper that is trying to prop up a failing Conservative government? No, that sounds like the knives are out to me. The end of the article, the last thing that would have left the reader, and I quote, tough to watch. Mr. Johnson's supporters might well say, who cares about PMQs? The Prime Minister has a far more important things on his plate. He's trying to tackle a pandemic, for pity's sake. Which is true. The trouble is, all of Sir Keir's questions were about the Prime Minister's handling of the pandemic, about his government's advice, its actions, its figures, its findings. Now consider that final little parting shot there. This is a newspaper that isn't obviously covering for Boris Johnson here. It's reporting exactly what happened in PMQs, but then look at the end of it. They're even trying to imagine what their normal reader would think of the situation. This paper is going, right, you right-wing Tory supporting reader will think, give him a break, he's trying to tackle this tough pandemic. The paper is then going, yeah, you might think that, but you'd be wrong. They're preempting their readers' thoughts. They are attacking Boris Johnson. This is an actual attack on Boris Johnson. The paper could have covered for him, as it so often does. Even during this crisis, it's done that. On this occasion, it has chosen not to. And this is curious. And bear this in mind. This is not a newspaper that's suddenly going to turn into Labour supporters. This is not a newspaper that is a swing voter. This is a newspaper that actually got its knuckles rapped a few years ago for emailing all of its subscribers urging them to vote Conservative. These guys want a Conservative government and will beg, borrow and steal to retain it. But an article like this doesn't suggest that they're going to attack the Conservative government, does not suggest that they're going to try and bring down the Conservative government. It simply suggests that they aren't all that bothered anymore about that Conservative government being led by Boris Johnson. And that is interesting. But anyway, did you find it interesting? Hope you did. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.